What's going to be interesting is to see whether the Americans decide to supply the system nonetheless, but to ensure that it receives only shorter range weapons.
President Joe Biden has said the US will not supply Ukraine with rockets that can reach Russian territory in an apparent attempt to ease tensions with Moscow. This comes as the battle continues for key areas in eastern Ukraine, with Russia's foreign minister calling the Donbas region an unconditional priority. I'm joined now by Jonathan Marcus, former BBC defence and diplomatic correspondent. Good morning to you.
Yes, good morning. Hi.
Do you understand the reasoning for Joe Biden's decision?
Well, we're talking here about the HIMARS, or the multiple launch rocket systems. One's tracked, one's wheeled, and they can fire a number of rockets and missiles. As you say there, one of them has a remarkable range of up to 300 kilometers. So it's clear that the Americans are not going to supply that. I think the fear was it would be seen by Russia as a really significant escalation in Western support. It would enable the Ukrainians clearly to shoot well into Russian territory. What's going to be interesting is to see whether the Americans decide to supply the system nonetheless, but to ensure that it receives only shorter range weapons. Many analysts believe, and the Ukrainians desperately want this system, many analysts believe this could be a very significant increase in firepower to the Ukrainian military at a time when artillery duels are becoming one of the main aspects of the confrontation, certainly in the east.
From what you know about this specific weaponry, could it make the difference? Could it let Ukraine win this particular conflict?
No, I don't think any weapon is going to let Ukraine win in and of itself. Clearly, what we've seen is a steady flow of weaponry into Ukraine, and those people who are kind of enthusiasts for this kind of thing, if you look at Twitter and other sites, you see an extraordinary panoply of Western weapons, anti-tank systems, artillery systems, armored vehicles, and so on, gradually now going into service with the Ukrainian forces. That has been central in ensuring that the Ukrainians have not been defeated. I don't think Ukraine is in a position right now to go on a major counteroffensive against the Russians. But over time, if its artillery systems and systems like this multiple launch rocket system were supplied in sufficient numbers, it would undoubtedly strengthen Ukraine's hand and give it a much greater offensive ability against Russian forces.
From what you can see about the current state of play, especially in the east of the country, is this still a long war?
I think sadly it is looking more and more like that. I mean, the Russians are pressing now on Severodonetsk. We think Russian forces are in the northeastern and southeastern outskirts of the town or the city, trying to push further in. They haven't fully encircled the city yet, and it's going to be interesting to see whether Ukrainian commanders decide to try and fight on, or whether at some point they try to extricate as many of their forces as they can. It is interesting, there are other Russian pushes in and around the area which are trying to cut crucial roads, the crucial ground lines of communication that are, of course, not only supplying forces in the city, but also would be the avenue of escape if Ukrainian generals decided to try and withdraw them. So a huge battle going on there. The thing is, though, I think most people believe that the Russians, after this particular part of the campaign, are likely to be pretty exhausted. British intelligence officials yesterday were talking about devastating losses amongst Russian junior and mid-level commanders. And remember, many of the units that the Russians are employing have been kind of cobbled together from remnants of units that took quite a bashing in some of the earlier fighting around the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and so on. So it may be that the Russians want to have a pause and reconstitute their forces, perhaps try to recruit significantly more forces, although Mr. Putin has been unwilling to fully mobilize his country. Remember, Ukraine is fully mobilized, and this is what's giving it a significant advantage in some ways in manpower. It's doubtful, I think, whether the Ukrainians, as I say at the moment, have sufficient punch and reserve to launch a major counteroffensive of their own. So I think we're going to see a kind of a stalling of the conflict for a period. But I think both sides believe that there are also economic factors working in their favor. Obviously, for the Ukrainians, the sanctions against Russia, the international sanctions, are going to take more and more effect over time. You've heard today about a sixth round of EU sanctions against Russia, particularly a limited or progressive effort to stop oil imports. That's going to have an effect. The Russians, for their part, believe that there are signs in the West of disunity. They believe that economic pressure can work its way on the West to try and discourage the Ukrainians from pressing on with this conflict and so on. So I think, sadly, we are going to see a conflict rumbling on for some months yet. And that makes Western solidarity behind Ukraine, and it makes continued arms supplies to Ukraine doubly important.
Jonathan, thank you very much. Jonathan Marcus, former BBC Defence and diplomatic correspondent.